lot of time thinking about what I have found to be the gifts and challenges of working ecumenically within social justice work. And I kept coming back in my mind to the time when I really was first involved with this kind of work, and that was over 30 years ago with the Nestle's boycott. And I remember being quite astonished that Canadian churches, together through 10 Days for World Development, had endorsed this boycott of Nestle's. And I became a good friend of Lois Kunkel, who was the staff person coordinating that for the regional 10 Days group. And Lois said, if we just said that we're really concerned about aggressive promotion of infant formula in poor countries, we wouldn't get any attention from anybody, but we were boycotting Nestle's, and that caught people's attention. Well, why were we doing that? Why were the churches endorsing this? It was interesting how this issue came to the attention of people in general and the churches in particular. But in the case of the churches, people who worked overseas, and I know we have people here today who did that, would report, that in maternal and child health clinics in poor countries, that people were getting into to try to promote formula feeding in really inappropriate situations. Often these were salespeople who would be dressed in a way similar to a nurse. And another very striking memory that I have is that people who had worked in Africa reported that in many communities it was traditional to place a favorite object on the grave of a person who died. And in the case of an infant, this was frequently a baby bottle. People would say to us here in Canada, why is this a problem? Women should be able to bottle feed if they want to. Well, if they don't have access to clean water and they don't have the money to purchase formula, it was a major issue. And so this became a very effective organizing tool to show people that we in northern countries don't necessarily have the best way of doing things, and that promoting inappropriate technology in a setting like a maternal health clinic in a very poor country is something that just shouldn't be done. It was empowering to work together with people from other churches in this area. I remember that Lois and I spoke to women's groups in different churches, and the different churches, denominations that sponsor 10 Days for World Development. And another thing that really began to develop in the 70s and 80s was a network of local ecumenical committees. And I think that is one of the greatest contributions, first of 10 Days and then now of Kairos, to the Canadian ecumenical movement, because we would try really hard to get representatives from the different denominations on our local committees. And that was difficult because, and still is, because, for instance, in the neighborhood where Audrey and I have been on a committee for many years now, at one point, just in our really fairly small catchment area, we had 4 Anglican and 4 United churches, but no Presbyterians and just 1 Lutheran church. So trying to be inclusive and make sure that we reached out to the denominations that in our particular area didn't have so many congregations was a challenge. I wanted to mention one other issue where I felt I really was pleased to be part of an ecumenical effort, and that was a difficult issue, but ended up being something that really we learned a great deal from. And that was, I think the year actually was 1988, when the international debt crisis was very much in the news. And each year, 10 Days would suggest what we called the action, or an action, where we wanted everybody to do one particular thing, to focus on that action. In later years, for example, one year it was to buy fair trade coffee. But in 1988-89, we were asked to request a meeting with our local bank manager to discuss the international debt crisis. And people were really quite taken aback at this suggestion. Everybody, without exception, said, well, I don't know enough about the international debt crisis to sit down with the bank manager. Well, guess what? The bank managers didn't know much either. And we soon found that the process of learning about the issue and why this had become such a difficult situation for people in third world countries educated us and gave us a lot of confidence. And again, it was empowering to work together. Very few bank managers agreed to meet with local groups, but many letters, people would say, well, can you write a letter? And if we think churches have hierarchies, banks really have hierarchies. And the letters were moved along. And I remember hearing from the National 10-Day staff that one vice president at Bank of Nova Scotia ended up with 50 letters on her desk from 10 Days people. It's empowering to be part of a national and international network like Kairos. It can be lonely to be working on social justice issues in your own congregation. When you find out that you have a neighbor in another church who shares your passion for justice, it's a great gift. We used to laugh that there was one theory of social justice education that we called the vaccination theory. And that is, we don't have to do that now because a month ago we were inoculated. We had a talk about some justice issue. And so it was great to work work with friends from other churches. I think for me, one of the most valuable gifts has been the challenge to my own preconceptions about other denominations. My most vivid memory of this was talking to a woman who was from a small city in Ontario, and this was at the time of the Nestle's boycott. And in addition to asking individuals to boycott Nestle's, we were trying to persuade hospitals not to give out packages of formula to new mothers as they left the hospital with their breastfed baby. And so this 10 Days volunteer had gone to a local hospital to meet with the CEO of the hospital, who was a Catholic nun. And of course, in the tradition I grew up in, we assumed that women in the Catholic Church had very little power. Well, the volunteer sat down with the hospital CEO with some trepidation, hoping she could convince her not to have the formula packages handed out to new mothers. And she realized that the sister was kind of rifling through some papers and making notes to herself, and she said, so, sister, do I have your agreement that you will stop the distribution of formula samples? And the sister said, well, of course, what I'm trying to do is to figure out how to get our food service in the hospital to boycott Nestle's. That was a good lesson for me.